Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Very warm welcome for our Smart Talk. My name is Beatrice. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Smart Talk. And today we have a super guest. I'm very excited, a friend of mine and my own mentor, Carol Hagh. Hi, Carol.
Hi, Beatrice. How are you?
Very well. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Very well.
Well, we had a record of registrants for the webinar today. I think the topic is super interesting. Obviously, for us, it's close to our heart because it's about networking, the art of networking. And you, Carol, you are the master of networking. You've been doing this all your career, and today you're gonna to tell us all your secrets how to do it right.
Cool.
You just to tell the Smart Tribers a little bit about you. You have been working for a number of years especially in the HR technology business, in the executive search and HR. You have very international career yourself. You're American, living in London. You are also angel investor, currently super involved in advising and helping startups. But you have a long-term corporate career working for great name from Aviva and others. If you can just tell a little bit the Smart Tribers about yourself and how your career span over these years and why it was so important for you networking.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I just first want to say I really admire what you've built with this business, with Smart Tribe. I think it's terrific that you are connecting really high caliber academic talent with industry, and what a big difference that can make, especially in this difficult time in the world. So it's fantastic to be here. And as you mentioned, I had an executive career. It was multinational, mostly working with a lot of big companies, a lot of them in financial services and a bit in consulting, and then laterally in executive search, working for one of the big global headhunting firms. So yeah, it's been an interesting time. I'm now an angel investor. I also I advise startups. And it's very interesting to see what's developing in HRTech and FinTech and all these different ecosystems in this very unique time. So I'll talk a little bit about networking today. Networking has gotten me amazing opportunities, jobs I would never have thought about, or has given me access to people who are really quite extraordinary that I've really learned a lot from. And I think, and certainly as a headhunter, it is sort of the lifeblood of what you do, because it's to do with your client acquisition as well as getting valuable insight into the candidate pool.
That's great. So why we know people networking all their lives. We network since we are very young with children because we want to have a nice friends, right? So we network. We network later in personal purposes. It's called dating, right? To find a partner. But today we'll be talking about professional networking. For Smart Tribers, especially the part in academia, it's sometimes very challenging to get out and find people in a different environment, which is industry. So if you can tell a little bit why people in really networking in the professional environment, what are the key reasons why it's so crucial and important?
Okay, so I think there are three big reasons why you would network professionally. Number one, it gives you access to really interesting opportunities in your career, especially ones you don't expect. Number two, it can help you learn new things. So I know as an academic, you'll want to read and do research. So if you think of this networking as learning from people, doing research through a different way, that actually might be very interesting. And the third thing is it actually really can be enjoyable if you do it the right way. So, I mean, more than half, I think, of my extended family are PhDs or academics. So I can absolutely understand that perspective, particularly when you're going into industry, which is maybe not a familiar environment. But you just have to remember, everybody is social, whether we're introverted or extroverted. And this is really about meeting people. So networking is not about, it's not this sort of, I think some people use words that express their discomfort about networking. And it is not about like talking to someone, only half paying attention, eyeing the next person, trying to collect business cards, trying to send out LinkedIn connections. So it's about quality and not quantity. It's about relationships and building and investing time in those relationships for mutual benefit. So to that end, I just want to, I actually saw this very interesting nugget on the Smart Tribe website. I was just so delighted to see it. So I'm going to quote from it because I think it's really important. So your website says, in just a few clicks, we can meet a husband or wife or teacher, a mentor, a new employer, or a friend. Meeting the right person can change our life. And I do think that is true. And that happens to people all the time.
Oh, thank you. I think I wrote that blog some time ago. So thank you for quoting that. I have few stats which supports what you're saying. Apparently 60% of great jobs, skilled jobs, which are for our audience, to be found only through networking. 10 times, you are 10 times more likely to get a job if you are recommended by someone from your network within the industry. 40% of employees, and this was pre-COVID time, prefer to network in order to do business. So the statistics are really, really high. I think 84% people professionally network constantly. So I don't think we need to persuade anyone further. It's a no-brainer. My next question is how different it is for within different industries, because we can argue, oh, it's different in academia and it's different in the industry world. You work many years in the financial services, which is very different to other industries as well. Is it the same or it's really different?
So I think the intention and behaviors are the same, but maybe the topics are different, or where you meet people can be very different. So maybe if you're in an industry or an academic discipline that has a lot of conferences, that, it's about more about where rather than what you do and what your intentions are about the networking. But I think there's something very human and universal about trusting people that you know and getting to know people that you can become trusting of. So I would say it's a fairly universal thing.
And what are the golden rules of networking?
Yeah, so I have 4 golden rules actually. So rule number 1 for me is always find a human connection. So the thing I do if I'm meeting someone and I can really think of nothing else and I just want to make it easy, I always ask people about their last holiday. It's extraordinary. It surprises me how much this works. So this works in networking at an event. If you have a business meeting and you need an icebreaker, I've even used it in job interviews very effectively. So I think this is the thing. You need to find something that will elicit a positive response and bring people a happy memory. So for example, if they bring up their kids, their holiday house or their childhood, whatever it is, be interested and ask. And if you can't find anything, always ask about their last holiday. People always smile when they think about that. So I'll just give you an example. I met someone very, very high profile who agreed very graciously to spend some time advising me about my career. And basically I walked in and he was reflecting on something that had to do with his childhood. And we ended up spending more than half of our meeting time talking about various things about his childhood. And I was absolutely fascinated and not at all worried about the time, because what he was saying was really interesting and I was making a connection. And the great thing about making a connection is that everything you say after you've created that warmth is more interesting and credible, and that person becomes more willing to help you with whatever it is you want to ask. So I think that human connection by far is golden rule number 1. So golden rule number 2 is to stay in touch. So if you meet at a conference, you have even a nice interview or something, even if you don't get the job, always be gracious. stay in touch, especially if you have a good connection, and maintain that connection. So don't think it's one meeting and then, you get on LinkedIn and connect and then you forget about it. I mean, do those things, but you want to find reasons to stay in touch, whether you see them again or you just email them something that they might find interesting. Whatever it is, keep that connection and see if you can deepen that relationship over time. The third thing is you want to be authentic. And that means it's not just that you're sucking things out or that you're being transactional or that you're being manipulative. This is a mutual relationship. So they share and you share, and just be your authentic self. And that's how the human connection comes in. And then the fourth thing, which is, I don't know if it's exactly a golden rule, but I think it's a bit of a reassurance. You won't win everybody. You will not have that chemistry with everybody. So choose where you're going to invest the time. Choose who is relevant to you and where you feel that connection mutually. And don't worry if you don't get it every time. It's not it is simply not realistic that you win everyone over.
And so what is your secret? Do you have any secret? How do you network?
How do I network? So I think, particularly in terms of meeting new people, I think this is where people get stuck sometimes, because if it's someone you know already or you worked with before, in a way it's kind of easier to keep going with that, and that is still networking as well. But the secret to new meetings, new connections, is put yourself out there. So there are three things that I do. Number one, I would say before the pandemic, and then someday when things normalize again, I was going to a lot of events. So this can be conferences, technology talks, alumni events, all kinds of things where I found the topic enjoyable and relevant, and where I was likely to meet people who found it the same way. So that was one thing I did. The second thing is warm introductions. So if you are meeting with someone you already know well, and you're talking about something where you want their advice, what you really want is for them to say, I know someone who could help you with that. Or if they don't offer it and you feel they would be comfortable with you asking, then you ask, do you know someone is there someone that you think I should meet? And that kind of warm reference, warm introduction where you say, I met Beatrice today. She is terrific. You guys should meet. I think you'd really hit it off, and maybe you could help each other. That sort of warm introduction is just fantastic. And then the third thing I do, I think this has more to do with how you manage those people that you do meet, is being very, very organized about staying in touch. So I put all of my meetings in meeting notes into Outlook, actually. And, I'll just say I met this person at this time, on this date, at this place. And these are some of the things we talked about. And I'll just leave a little note for myself. It would be good to get back in touch with them in 6 months, 12 months, or whatever the relationship is. And this allows me to make sure that I maintain a certain degree of contact within my network that's appropriate for each person.
Okay. And, I find kind of sometimes intimidating or even scary to reach out to someone who is more senior to me. It's to peers, it's easier, obviously, but somebody who is senior, who's more influential. A few weeks ago, I managed to network with CEO of one of the big tech companies, and for a day I thought it was a joke. It's not happening. And then the second day, my family told me just shut up, because I was constantly talking about it. I was so excited, but it was scary.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, they're still people. And, when they started out, they were exactly the same as everybody else. So I think this is the thing with senior people, right? Is they're still just people. And they have as much interest in meeting you as you do in them, in a way. Because, the analogy that I give around this is, when you join a new institution, whether it's an academic institution or a company or whatever it is, you meet the more senior people, you meet the colleagues, and you meet the more junior people. And that's all for different reasons, right? You meet senior people because they're powerful and influential. You meet colleagues because you will collaborate with them. You meet the junior people because maybe they're on your team or they're on the key members of the teams of your colleagues, or maybe sometimes they will come work for you or they will get, surpass you. You need to get to know everybody. And it's the same in the mindset of the senior people. They also want to meet people who are junior to them. They learn something and they don't know where that person's going to go. They don't know where that relationship will go. So as long as it's a good, strong, mutual relationship, they have as much interest in meeting you as you do in them sometimes.
That's a very good point. Thank you. Another point very often comes from our community is they really want, some of them want to really network with or talk to people who are like them, okay, from the same background or even same city, same environment. I understand the relevance, but should we really be focused on who we are networking with, or should we just be a little bit expanding our horizons and see who is out there as well from different background, maybe to have different perspective? This is my take on this, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think this is a difficult one. I think it depends very much on the individual circumstances. So for example, if you have spent a long time in a particular industry, then it makes sense that you would network primarily in that industry, right? Because you have to prioritize your time in a way, and you want to look at what's going to be helpful to you. But also, like, if you have a situation where you've worked in very different industries, but you've always worked in the same function. So maybe your networking is a little bit broader, but it's more focused around that function. So it's whatever is going to be relevant to your situation and what is more likely to be beneficial, right? But the other thing that is very important about networking is literally the networking effect. So networks tend to work in clusters, right? So, I worked a long time, for example, in the insurance industry, and that is particularly within sub-segments of it, very densely networked. And what I love about this is that if you get to know a handful of people in this particular segment and have good relationship with them, they will probably mention you or talk about you to other people. And it has happened to me more than once that I've gone into a job interview with someone I don't know, and they have said to me, "Oh, you're Carol. I have heard about you. And I'm really delighted that we're having a chance to meet." And that is like the most terrific feeling you can have at the start of a job interview. So you have to think strategically about how these clusters work and where is the relevance to you as you develop your career over time.
That's a good point. There's a very good point. And yes, time management is super important, which leads me to another question. On LinkedIn, we are being approached by so many people, depending on our positions and so on. It's just impossible to answer to everyone, even if I want to, even to say, no, thank you, I don't need your services, or I cannot speak right now, and so on. Is it okay just to ignore people?
Yes, I think that is absolutely okay, particularly on social media platforms and particularly with people you have never heard of, because that's not networking. That's just spam. That's like, I'm always surprised to get random pitch decks from people I've never met because they see that I'm an angel investor. "Oh, do you want to invest in my company?" And I'm like, I get so many of these that it doesn't feel like networking. It feels like you are being manipulated or that it's spam or something like that. And with some of them, I can clearly see that it is they've slightly got my name wrong, or there's something going on there where I'm thinking, there's something automated going on here, something very transactional going on here. So I think that's totally fair. And networking is really about relationships that create a mutual benefit. It is not about racking up the business cards or LinkedIn connections. I think there's kind of like a lot of services out there that will say, "Oh, we're going to grow your LinkedIn network," and it's kind of spam in a way. There are other ways to get contacts and make connections that are more about sales, but that is not networking. Networking is relational, and it is not about having a one-way transactional volume sort of thing.
Okay. So how to twist the pitch to someone who we don't know? I should say, how I use it. Also, I don't say, "Oh, could you invest in SmartTribe?" I say, "Could I have your advice?"
Yeah. Or you get an introduction through somebody you know. Surely there must be somebody you have in common. Or maybe you invite them to something like a really interesting webinar. And you say, look, we don't really know each other, but I think we might have something in common. We know these people, and I wonder if you'd like to join me at this thing. So personally, I'm not a big fan of the cold approach because it just doesn't work very well. It's much better to get a warm introduction or to come across people, like maybe you attend the same conference or whatever, and you come across them once or twice and you say, you know, I see you and we haven't met. I'd like to introduce myself. I think that is much more likely to get a warm response. And do you really have the time to do all these cold approaches when, you know, you can get a warm introduction and you probably got a whole lot of people that you know already or have worked with that you could deepen those relationships. So you have to look at how you prioritize your time.
Well, that's a music to my ears, because in SmartTribe, we are introducing people to each other. It's just not a warm introduction of people we know, and we are just passing on that relationship with friendships. I'm very happy to hear that. But
yeah,
flip the coin. How to deal with rejection? It could be personal, especially people who are not used to network. And they might feel like, oh, I'm not being liked, or I'm not good enough. How to take it?
Well, I think it depends on what the rejection is, right? So I have some people I know very well and have good relationships with, and sometimes I will email them and hear nothing. And I assume they're just really busy. So the thing to do in that case is don't make them feel uncomfortable. Don't point this out, and just wait a couple months and say, hi, it's Carol. And just forget it. Just like move on. And a couple months later, just contact them again. And usually you just get a response. So that's, you know, that's kind of more of a situation where there might be a misunderstanding or somebody's just really busy and didn't see, and that's fine. I think there are other situations where maybe you've only met once or twice and that person didn't feel the connection. Or maybe it's someone you've contacted a few times and they're still ignoring you. And I would say, that's okay. You're gonna let it go because you have so many other things you can be doing. And there's so many other people where it's a natural connection. So I'm gonna go back to one of my golden rules, which is you're not gonna win everyone and you don't wanna force it. And this has to have an enjoyable element to it. You are not going to win everybody, and it's not something that is wrong with you if you don't.
And any key points on cultural differences? I mean, we are one global village, and when it comes to networking, it's our global platform. We have people from all over the world, and we behave the same, or we think we behave the same. Or there's something we should really watch out for when it comes to cultural differences, or maybe even between men and women is different. Is there anything you've noticed?
So I think if you stay in your own culture, it's always very apparent to you, right? You're talking about crossing cultures, or you're talking sometimes about intersectionality. So let me talk about intersectionality first. I'm going to just define that a little bit. Intersectionality is where you have more than one criterion, more than one variable happening, right? So if you are, for example, cross-culture and different genders at the same time, then it is worth just even doing a little bit of homework, even if you just Google it, because, for example, there are certain cultures where a man and a woman, you know, you invite them out for a drink, and that means something you don't intend. So you just want to do a little bit of research, particularly where you have this cross intersectionality. I think the other thing about cultural differences is that it's very easy to stereotype. So just make sure you do your homework, or if you have a friend from a culture that you're less familiar with, don't be shy about, calling on that friend and saying, well, look, what's the best way for me to do this? What are the do's and don'ts? So I think it's actually leveraging your very closest network to help you work that out. But I think the other thing is there's a silver lining to this pandemic, because so much of particularly the one-to-one networking has gone online now. It's over Zoom. So the potential for really big sort of mistakes in that cultural thing is a lot lower. And then the other thing I often hear, particularly I hear women being concerned about, well, I work in an industry with a lot of men, and particularly men who are in positions of power. And I feel nervous. Should I be meeting them one-on-one? Should I be inviting them to things? And, I understand where that concern comes from. Personally, I've never had an issue. I routinely invite all kinds of people, regardless of, gender, age, seniority, dinner, drinks. I've never had a problem, but I also think that, I've been in sufficiently senior roles when I've been doing this that perhaps it would have been very costly for someone to be inappropriate. So I think sometimes particularly women have this concern that maybe they're sending the wrong signals or there would be something inappropriate. And I want to talk specifically about that because I think that there's a lot of concern around how do you develop your career in that context. And I would say, you know what, be sensible. Do it in daylight, meet over coffee or lunch and not over dinner if you feel less comfortable. And particularly now, Zoom has become such a normal way of doing things, and it does make some things a lot easier.
You touched on COVID. The fact that we are on in lockdown for such a long time, or still staying, or being encouraged to less socialize in person. Hopefully the situation will change. We will be able to go for a coffee soon enough. But do you think this networking it really helps the past year networking more even across the globe, across different industries and people and so on, and will stay this kind of trend which developed is here with us forever?
Yeah, so I think this whole thing has changed a lot of people's individual circumstances. So one of the things I do a lot is I tend to network a lot with the non-exec population. And some of them are just demographically older, so they're more cautious and shielding, and some of them just aren't very comfortable with technology. So I would say I'm probably on the whole doing less of that and more networking with the technology ecosystem. And also particularly, I think this is an interesting point, particularly when you're doing things over Zoom, you are able to cross geographies quite easily. So if I came across somebody in Silicon Valley and we would say, oh, we should meet up next time I'm in San Fran or you're in London, it would be like 2 years. And now we can just say, hey, let's have a Zoom next week, and it's totally normal. So it makes some things easier and some things harder. And I think the other thing is, some people have had very difficult personal circumstances in this pandemic. People who are worried about elderly parents or worried about homeschooling children and worry about work-life balance. Maybe they're working longer hours even at home. So whatever the circumstances are, I think some people are lucky not to feel pressed by these things. And some people are in these circumstances and they might feel they have less time for this. And we all have these times in our lives that circumstances make things difficult. And I would say in that case, relax, there will be time for this, but do try to keep your 15 to 20 closest people still in contact. Just prioritize your time, and then there will be time to do all those other activities later, and try to just be organized about it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Carol. I think might have an hour to question you about your golden rules and tricks are up, and we have already some questions from people, from the audience.
Great.
And I will start reading to you. I have a first question. It came from Jayan. Would it feel forced when you ask about the last holiday if you start a conversation with that? I mean, this is an interesting question because when you talk about it, I had as well, when is the line, when is the border not to overstep or not to come across as a praying and asking about personal thing?
Okay. So yeah, this is a bit of an art, right? So yeah, you meet someone for the first time and say, "Hi, Beatrice, I'm Carol." And then you might say something about yourself and you might say something. So maybe the holiday isn't always the first question. Maybe you ask something like, "Oh, we are at the same place. Did you come from far to get here?" Right? So sometimes you have some easier questions. The reason why I mentioned the holiday question is because I've never seen anyone offended by that question. And I've also never seen anyone who does not smile when they talk about it. So I think it's just making sure you have enough permission to really ask that sort of question. But in the realm of personal questions, I think there's some where we have to be very careful. Like we all know you don't ask someone's age or weight, but something that like people ask me all the time, they say, "Where are you from?" And that can be a tricky question because it's so innocent. And yet it can be taken as, "Oh, you're making an issue of my ethnicity." Or somebody will say, "Oh, I spent time in this part of the world. We have something in common." And I'm looking at them like, "Oh, you're assuming, and it's too much for me." So you want to be very careful about the personal questions. I think you want to stick to the safe ones. I think holiday, everybody takes holiday. You can talk about any holiday you want, and it it brings a smile, right? Or if you say, "How far did you travel from?" That's a very neutral question. So when you ask personal questions, make sure that they have something universal about them. But that holiday one, I have to say, particularly one-to-one, where maybe I met the person very briefly once before, and now I'm sitting down properly with them. I will say something like, "How was your summer? Did you go on holiday?" And they'll say, "Yes, I did. I went to this place." And then and they always have a story and they light up.
Yeah, and I mean, this is when we talk one to one. What are the good icebreaker when we do network digitally? Like, for example, on Smart Drive, we introduce people to each other. It's like almost a dating side, but it's a professional introduction between people. So we introduce, well, hello, Sonia, this is Jayan, and we're introducing each other because you have this in common and you should be speaking to each other. And then the first person has to come and say, "Hi." And it's kind of rude to say, "Oh, when are we going to speak? What should we say? What are the good icebreaker in digital world?"
Yeah, no, I can see your point. I mean, of course, you have to ease into it. I think I'm thinking of a scenario where you're sort of in front of someone, and it's an easy conversation piece. But you're right. I mean, it's great that you guys offer that prompt. Here's what you guys have in common. Start with that. Or you might say something like, "Wow, look at this great weather. Have you been getting out much?" That's like so easy. People always talk about the weather. This is like universal to every culture.
Yeah, and it's okay to go first and start the conversation. That's what we also see. So many people just hesitate and wait when the first person starts the conversation, but let's jump ahead.
Yeah, actually, I saw this statistic. I think it was like it's a random statistic I saw about particularly dating sites, that people who make the first approach are 3 times more likely to develop a connection that is beneficial.
That's a good
I
one.
can't remember where I read that, but I just found that to be extraordinary because sometimes people do feel shy about, being first.
It's another question. How to show your interest to a recruiter when sending him a personalized LinkedIn invitation?
Okay. So this is a very, very difficult topic because everybody wants to get on top of the recruiters. And the recruiters, I will just tell you from the economics of it, are more focused on clients than they are on candidates because the candidates come to them all the time. So yes, you need to know your candidate pool And yes, you do spend time getting to know them, but also there are so many that come to you. But on the client side, they very rarely come to you. You have to go get clients. So you have to remember, headhunters are inundated. So the best thing I can recommend to get on the radar of a headhunter is, first of all, if you can get a warm introduction, that is the best way. Ideally, from someone who has been a client of theirs. That's an important relationship for them. They're going to want to keep that person happy. The second way you can do it is you always want a very positive relationship with people who are relatively senior, who have recently left your company. Because a lot of the time, particularly on the top end of executive search, on the very top end, when they are looking for talent for a particular role, they will ask people who have recently left a company, who was good there? Who do you remember? Who do you recommend? So if you think about it, this is a very networked way of doing it. You can send your CV, and there's nothing wrong with that. It just you're much more likely to get a warm response and possibly a meeting or a phone call if you go through a warm introduction through your network.
Okay. We have another question from Pavan. When you network with a C-suite executive, and you're reaching after some time, let's say after a year, how do you approach this conversation, especially when you have an agenda?
So it's someone you know well. Let me just understand the question. It's someone you know well who's more senior to you and you want something.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, I think you have to ease into it. So in that scenario, I would ideally like to see them face to face, whether it's over video or in person. And you want to be relaxed. And ideally what you want to say is, Beatrice, it's great to see you. And you want to do a bit of small talk to make sure you retain that connection. So, hey, how was your last holiday? So whatever it is. And then you want to say, there's something I've been meaning to ask you about. This is a dilemma or this is something I've been wanting to learn more about or wanting to explore. Do you know someone? Do you think that there's somebody I should meet? Do you have any advice? So you have to kind of ease into it. And ideally, if you have a good enough relationship, that person wants to help you anyway. So they might even offer and say, oh, I see you're doing some research on this topic. I know someone great. You really should meet them. And you also want to make sure that you reciprocate. It doesn't have to be in that meeting, but in the course of the relationship, you want to make sure that you're trying to be helpful to them as well. Alert them to people they should get to know. Give them knowledge that would be helpful to them. So you have to remember this is a mutual relationship, and there's a bit of give and take that happens over a period of time.
Okay, thank you. A question from Paromita. Where is a good place? What are good places to network now when many face-to-face opportunities to network, like at conferences, events, are impossible? Any suggestion, obviously, apart from Smart Tribe?
Of course. Well, Smart Tribe obviously is the first place you go. Yeah, I think it is difficult. I think we're all trying to figure that out, really. So there are like some virtual conferences where they actually have networking tools, and I'm sure you've seen these. That doesn't work nearly as well as just creating a small personal connection along the way. So I think you still should be doing these things. It's just going to be a little less effective. And the other thing is, this is the time to really put more energy into the warm introductions, and also to put energy into deepening the relationships you already have. Because the thing you have to remember about networking is it's not just about getting constantly more and more new connections. It's also about deepening the relationships with the people that you already know, or that boss that you worked for 5 years ago who was a really good boss who you've lost track of. So go back to the people you've lost touch with, because actually this is a really great time to reconnect with people.
Yes. One way I found, Paramita, also nowadays, obviously the usual ways of networking, online events, conferences. I met a lot of people last week on the London Tech Week as well. I find a lot of women, we have a lot of conferences and events, and it's easy to jump. But also when people comment something, I found myself in conversation, and I know you Paramita, you are very good with this, getting engaged. Is one of our great smart drivers. So comment on this, and recently I also met someone who I really wanted to have a conversation. It's a fantastic tech company in California, only because I commented the same article, and we had an offline conversation about it, just intellectual conversation about some future tech, which turns into relationship, a kind of professional relationship. So I think we can use the ways how we are now all online and forced to interact together even more. We have a question from Abhishek Gupta. Thank you very much. Hi, Abhishek. How to stay in touch to a large connection in network? You can only know a few people effectively. And the algorithm in LinkedIn suggests we regularly should be interacting with others. So how to stay connected? I mean, this is a very, very good point. It's really difficult to stay in touch with a family and friends. What about how professional network?
Yeah, so there are a lot of techniques for doing this. So I think the first thing is when you say staying in touch, it does not mean you have a coffee with everybody every time you contact them, right? Sometimes it's just an email to say, hey, I've had a new job. So like when you have changes in your own events or your own situation, that's a great time to just let everybody know. And ideally, like an individual email, hi, Beatrice, we haven't talked in 6 months. Hope things are well. Hope you had a good summer. By the way, just giving you my news. I've got myself a new role. Let's stay in touch, or let's grab a coffee, this side of Christmas or something like that. So sometimes it just can be just an email or just an article that maybe you published or found really interesting or really relevant to them. Or maybe, even better, maybe you're introducing them to someone. Hi, Beatrice, I just met with Mark yesterday, who I hadn't seen in a while, and he's doing something really interesting. You guys should meet. Now that actually is your networking as well. You are reminding this person that you exist. So anything like that, any activity, any contact is still deepening that relationship. And the other thing is, I try to be really clear. I do try to keep notes of when did I last contact someone. And if it's been several months, I'll say, you know what, I bet there's something new going on. I'm sure we can have a little catch up. So I think the other thing is you have to prioritize. You can't do this with 200 people. It's not feasible. So you want to be very clear who is sort of the closest network, who is next closest, and who do you really want to develop those relationships with? Who are you going to prioritize? And usually it is somebody who's highly relevant, not always the most senior, but someone who's highly relevant, with whom you have a very, very good mutual chemistry. And those are the ones to prioritize. So you want to be clear about that.
Okay. DV Logan has a question. When you have a vice president of a major railroad corporation in your LinkedIn network, what is the respectful way to stay in touch with them?
Well, that depends on why you are connected to them in the first place. So if you met them at an event, then you know what is the common interest that you have. But also, you may also accept that if all you had was a brief conversation, a LinkedIn connection, it's okay if it stops there. You don't have to develop everything into a deeper networking relationship. You have to look at where the opportunity is. So if, for example, I have a huge interest in classical music. If I came across somebody at an industry event and we both really had the same favorite pianist, I might go back to them and say, hey, you know, this person's in town, or they've just done a new recording. So sometimes it's just something leveraging that common interest. I think you have to find something like that, because otherwise it's going to sound like you are trying to take advantage of them. And I think it has to be something genuine that has to do with your common interests.
Mm-hmm. Yes, not to come across forceful.
Yeah.
That's right. A question from Jana Wade. What is the best way to start a conversation after a long period of silence? So you haven't been in touch with someone for a few years, and how to get started conversation, not to probably, if I can read between the line, yeah, it's not to come across that you have immediately agenda of something, but come across natural.
Yeah. So I think the important thing is, if you don't want to come across that way, don't do it. Don't go to them with an agenda. Just contact them. So actually, I've done this 2 times in the last week, where actually I realized there are some people I don't know very well, but actually there was some good rapport, and we have some things in common, but I haven't talked to them in like 2 to 3 years. And actually, the easiest way to do it is to say, hi, Beatrice. We met up a couple years ago at this thing, or this is how we met. And I can see you've had a lot of change and a lot of progress since we met. I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to hear your news. Let me know if you fancy catching up in the next few weeks. So people like talking about themselves. People like talking about the progress that they're making.
Yeah, that's just true. That's why we are what we've done, changing jobs and things like that. Congratulations on position and how you're doing. Yeah. Question from Venki. Is it okay to follow folks instead of sending connection requests on LinkedIn? So is it develop some rapport commenting, liking the person post, and then send connection requests? So kind of warming up into it.
So I guess my question to you is there something else you could be doing that is more beneficial, right? Because it's not just about getting in front of very senior people. Particularly, I think like if there are many levels of seniority between you and that person, it's a lot less likely they'll be able to directly help you. So just be careful about really prioritizing people purely on seniority, right? You want to make sure that there is the basis for connection. That's number one. Number two, what you're talking about is a little bit of a gradual way of doing a cold approach. Personally, I'm not a big fan of this. I think it's fine to follow people, especially if they have interesting content and you'd like to engage, and maybe it'll develop into something more. But actually, you probably have a lot of people that you know better, whose relationships you could invest in more, who would give you more benefit. So you just have to you really want to think carefully about where is the value added network activity in your network, rather than how do I get on this senior person's radar, right? This is about mutually beneficial relationships.
A question from Jayan is it's a very good one. If you just saw a job posting, it's really good for you, really suits you, but you have not connection with the company, like you don't know anyone there, so you cannot be introduced or warm up. Okay. But you really, really want that job. Even second connection, I think. Is it okay to approach the recruiter or someone in the department straight about the posting, and how often we should follow up?
Okay. So usually when jobs are posted, they can be very helpful and let you know what the protocol is. So sometimes they'll have an HR contact there. So I would say when it comes to job postings, try to follow the rules, because they have seen a million people try to break the rules in the wrong ways. So that's number one. And they don't like the idea that you might be creating some sort of conflict of interest or trying to get in the middle of something. The second thing I would say is, so if there is a contact there, it's always a good idea about, if you have not heard 4 or 5 days after you submitted your application, you want to be super low pressure about this. But you can send them a note and say, I sent an application on this date. I'm very, very keen on the role. Please let me know if you have everything. So I think it's very important not to demand or get pushy, but to say, if you need anything else, please let me know. And usually that will result in a confirmation. Beyond that, you should assume it is that person's job not to lose you in the pile of applications. And as an applicant who is completely unknown to them, unless you are like an incredible superstar for that role, you know, the odds are going to be against you, particularly if it's on a very big public platform like LinkedIn and it's a great role. So it's very hard to game these things, right? The best thing to do is to observe the rules. Don't get pushy. You know, don't bake them cookies and send them a batch every 2 weeks. You know, you don't want to look desperate. I think the thing is, if they haven't responded in a reasonable amount of time, it's fair to just send a polite response saying, still very keen on the role. Please do let me know if there's any update. But don't get over anxious about it, because probably you have other things you could be doing in your own network where you can get a warm introduction to something else that could be fantastic as well. And I think this whole thing around jobs and networking, it's an incredibly important byproduct of networking is to get yourself further in your career. But you also have to realize that if you leave all the networking to when you're looking for a job and you think you can just press the button and push and there's some tactic that will get you a job right away, it just doesn't work like that. And if anyone has a technique for that, I would like to know. But most of the time what happens is you are happy in your job. You've been there for a little while. You're not going to think about moving for another little while. But someone in your network says, you know what, Beatrice, someone was just telling you about this terrific job. And I know you're not really looking, but you really should at least talk to them. That's the kind of conversation you want, because you want these hidden opportunities that come along when you're not actively looking. And that is a compelling reason to keep a relational, mutually beneficial network in place most of the time.
There's one more question from Abhishek, follow up. It's a very common problem, I think, not only for Abhishek, but for many other people. In academia, people have relationships within academia predominantly. And if they develop new relationships, during events, conferences, are also people from academia. So they know how to speak to each other and so on. Can you suggest a few tips before connecting to industry?
Okay. So they are just people. They probably just don't know as much about your topic as you do, but they are still just people. And that's so important to remember, that we have a lot more in common than we don't. Everybody wants to connect. And particularly if you've been introduced via something like, a great platform like Smart Tribe, you already have something in common. That person is already interested in talking to you and learning something from you. So I think just approach them as a human being. Hey, I see we got this connection. We have this in common. And, I'd love to learn more. Maybe I can help you, or I'd love to learn more about what it is you're working on. So just a good human mutual exchange is what I would recommend.
Yeah, yes. My follow-up comment is, which I also find common mistake, or is the vocabulary. Don't try to impress talking techie language. Remember, they really want to know what you're doing. Very often people from industry by default have respect to you because you are a researcher. And they are curious and interested, but you have to speak their language. You have to come from, and the way how they will be thinking is, what does it mean for me as a person in this company? What does it mean for my company? What you're doing? How, and also as a human being, for example, in life science, very often we talk about science, but what does it mean, for me as a patient or something? So yes, using the common sense and not scientific language, I think it helps as well. There's a question from Matthew Kapp. There have been many questions about linking here. Do you actually consider using linking to be networking?
Not for new networking, not for me. I think some people do, but I have so many people that I come across where I know that we have something in common and there's a basis for chemistry. That's where I put my energy. So again, you always have to consider your opportunity cost when you do that kind of cold networking, right? I mean, that is, it can, if you do it the wrong way, it can be a form of spam. So you don't want to spend your time on that. You want to look at where can you create the human connection and develop a relationship.
One more question. It's about, can you suggest some warm introduction opening, especially in the digital? We talk a little bit about it in person, about the last holidays, but also the digital introduction. Should we suggest from which event we connect, or should we right away talk about the purpose of the meeting, or should we just build up first, but not to feel like we are wasting somebody else's time?
So if I try to understand the situation, it's somebody you kind of know but not well, and you're connecting with them for the first time on social media, right? So yeah, what I would do there is, hi Beatrice, we met at such and such a thing last year, or Sonia introduced us a little while back. I heard you're really interested in X. I'd love to talk to you about that. So I would keep it very, very general, because what you don't know is how good is your connection going to be? And is that person going to be really keen to help you? And you need to assess that in speaking with them before you start asking for favors. You need to have some sort of connection where they want to help you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Carol. We are running out of time. I know there are going to be plenty of more questions about networking, more important now than ever, and it's going to stay with us. We need to learn a very, very helpful new skill for many of our smart tribers, and it's exactly the heart of what we do. Carol, thank you so much. Any other questions people have? I suppose they can connect with you on LinkedIn, maybe ask and follow.
And Smart Tribe are the experts. It's the ultimate networking platform. So good luck to everybody. And thank you so much for having me, Beatrice.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone, for listening.